Well, I finally did it. I finally sat down and I finally embraced my destiny, folks. I watched Morbius, and you know what? It's not as bad as everyone's making it out to be. In fact, it's kind of a morbid good time, for the most part. Let's talk about it. Hey, what's going on, everyone? How you guys doing? Matt Jarbo here, 3 Buck Theater. And yes, I sat down last night and I finally watched Morbius. This is one that I didn't see in theaters for like a multitude of reasons. A lot of it had to do with the fact that the audience score was terrible. The Rotten Tomatoes audience score was terrible. And a lot of people were just kind of bashing this movie when it came out. And I saw the end credit scenes, like the post-credit scenes. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'll wait for home video. I don't know if I necessarily want to risk getting sick or even really spend money to watch this in theaters. But then I will fully admit, things have kind of changed my mind over the span of the last couple months. And a lot of that had to do with this like online embracement of Morbius, like this massive online embracement of this movie, even if it's done in a way that is meant to be like hilarious and mocking, it doesn't matter. People are talking about the movie. People are buying the movie. It was #1 on Vudu charts, #1 on iTunes, and #1 on home video sales for both the DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. People are embracing Morbius, and its Morbin time is kind of taking on its own little thing here. So when I sat down to watch the movie, I was like, all right, as I do with every film, I go in with the expectation to be entertained. And I'm not going to lie, I was actually pretty entertained all the way through it. It wasn't like spectacular. It wasn't jaw-dropping. It wasn't amazing. It was just a standard comic book movie that it felt like it might have been made in the roughly 2005 era of these kind of films, which is interesting because of who is at the head of Sony, and that is Tom Rothman. Tom Rothman ran Fox during that time period as well, so we can start to look at some of the quality issues here, never mind Avi Arad being the producer, like he was with Venom and Venom 2. I think that's your biggest problem as Avi Arad. And anyone who watches these movies has been saying this now for well over 2 decades. So we know who the problem child is. And this is the guy who just won't go away because he keeps making so much money that he sticks around. But let's talk about Morbius itself. So the movie, directed by Daniel Espinosa, who directed Life. I feel he got really screwed in this movie. I think he was kind of a director for hire. He came in, he did a pretty decent job. Part of the problem was, I guess, the editing of it, and I think that really kind of came on in and just hurt him, never mind the marketing. He has been open about how, like, he did not have any say over the trailer and the Spider-Man connections and the false marketing that Sony did, never mind the false marketing that Sony did to push Venom, at least Venom 2 in that post-credit scene, to bring it into the MCU only for about 2 months and then to take him back out at the end of No Way Home. They are really, really, really good at trying to connect it to the MCU as a way to bring in people. But this one actually failed rather than Venom, which succeeded for like a couple of reasons. One, it was Venom. It was a sequel. And 2, it came out before No Way Home. It had that hype. But then people thought that there was going to be a connection between No Way Home and Venom, or sorry, in Morbius. And yeah, there is at the very end of the movie, but it has no consequence on the film in any kind of meaningful way. Whereas Venom kind of did, this one did not. And I'll talk about that. So the movie begins with Michael Morbius traveling to South America to capture vampire bats. You saw it in the trailer. That's the cold open of the movie. No other information, no other explanation. He gets it, and then it immediately goes back to a flashback where we get introduced to Lucian, aka New Milo, played by Matt Smith in the adult version, and of course the Doctor, played by Jared Harris, who I love in practically everything, and he was good here for the amount of time he was in the movie. Then, you know, after like Michael ends up leaving this orphanage or this clinic, you know, in order to go to some new school to work really hard at being a doctor and to solve what's going on with their blood, we see that Lucian ends up going outside and gets beat up by a whole bunch of boys who found the note that Morbius had left behind. What cracked me up about that, though, as these kids are beating the shit out of young Lucian, I'm like, that's your villain origin story right there. That's why he's going to hate humanity down the road. And of course, him having that anger and that rage towards the world because he is disabled and he can't do what everyone else can do and he wants more is clearly going to play into his character arc, and it does. But again, it's also his love for Morbius. And I saw people try to make the argument, oh, Morbius is just a movie about two gay guys who love each other. And it's like, they're not, no, they're brothers. Not every male and male loving scenario is homosexual in nature. I don't have a problem with that, but it's like, come on, at least be real where it's real. You know what I mean? Like, don't try to shoehorn it in. And I've seen that play out too from some people online. I don't know if they're memeing it or they're joking or whatever. But, you know, Michael Morbius ends up, like, it cuts 25 years into the future, and now he's back at his Horizon clinic, and he's helping a little girl. You know, he's good little character interactions. I think Jared Leto did a pretty good job in the role, and I enjoyed him in the role immensely, actually, surprisingly. I also liked him as Joker, so my tastes will vary with yours probably, but that is okay. Then, of course, we meet, you know, Dr. Martine Bancroft, and like there's a good chemistry between the two of them. The will they, won't they? Are they going to get together? Do they love each other? And obviously that they do. But here's where things kind of take the first step towards stupid. So, you know, basically Morbius has this private like office, this private lab that no one is really supposed to enter in, but Martine figures it out. She goes on in there and she uncovers this entire circular cylinder thingy with a whole bunch of bats inside it that he's using, that he captured those bats, he brought them back, and this is what he's experimenting on. And she's like, no one should, you would lose your license for this. No one should know about it, but they never turn it off. I mean, literally for the rest of the movie, those bats are just like hanging out in this thing and they never come out. And like no one, and other people are in there and like no one ever questions it. Like no one ever questions it. Like just never brought up again. Even another nurse, while they're talking, we see her cross the background and then come in and say that there's a problem with that little girl. Even she, next to an entire huge thing of vampire bats, is not like, "Eine Minuten bitte, was ist das?" She nothing like that. Never once asking, what is this situation? What is this? What are we looking at? Never once asks that. Because once they've established it, there's really no time to spend with it. So they go from there. So then Morbius solves the equation. He now has the ability to kind of heal himself with this formula, but he needs to do it out in international waters. So he goes to Lucian to finance the expedition. Never mind, in the beginning of the movie, he turns down a Nobel Peace Prize, which usually comes with like $1 million prize. And even Martine is like, people will cut checks to Nobel winners, right? Like people, they'll cut checks. They'll give you money. But he's like, no, I can't because my artificial blood isn't good enough. Never mind. Later on, he actually gets compliments about his artificial blood and how it saved Tyrese's life when Tyrese was shot and injured in Afghanistan. But that's whatever. Okay. So from there, they go to this tanker in the ocean. Now there's mercenaries there for some reason. Don't quite see why that would be a thing, why you would need armed guards if you're just going to be doing an experiment in the middle of the ocean and a nondescript tanker in international waters. But of course, he takes the serum. He starts to turn. The mercenaries end up catching wind of it, and he kills all of them bloodlessly. Like you see this pretty much in like the trailer. It's really like the one, I would say, real like action scene in the movie where he's just taking out a whole bunch of bad guys. It's a cool scene, but it's missing blood. It's missing blood. It's just missing blood. And I know that's make it PG-13, but it's missing blood, and it's noticeable, but it's okay, fine, cool. Martine gets knocked out and then, so she doesn't see any of it. And then he grabs the 2 vials, calls in the authorities, calls the Coast Guard and said, there's a boat out here that's in a lot of trouble. And then he just dips out and whatever, right? Swims back to shore, the 11 miles back to shore, and then the police show up, and this is where we meet Tyrese and the other guy, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, and they kind of think that Morbius is somehow involved in it, but then they end up going to the Horizon Clinic and talking to him, and they think that, because also, I should say, sorry, again, I'm getting ahead of myself here, and so like he's there figuring it out. Lucian shows up trying to understand what's going on because he was watching the news and heard about all this. Discovers that Morbius has in fact found a cure. He wants the cure. Morbius is like, no, brother, it is a curse, for it is not us. We should not partake. And then, Lucian leaves, and then the nurse from before gets killed. And actually I like the scene in the hallway. That was pretty cool. With all the lights going off and whatever, and kind of building the tension. But then she gets killed by someone we assume to be Morbius based upon the clothes that we can see from a distance. But obviously it's not Morbius because we know he probably wouldn't do it, but they're leading us to believe that he did because they think that the audience is stupid. It was Lucian. I'm just going to say it right now. It was absolutely Lucian who did it, but we find this out later on. Then, with the body is discovered in the morning, the authorities are called. Morbius tries to escape. They catch him. They catch him, which is so funny. I mean, he was injured. He needed artificial blood, but he allows himself to get arrested, goes to jail. Lucian shows up and basically and this was cool. I'll fully admit, I liked the scene in jail where Lucian, pretends to be his lawyer. Because when he pretends to be his lawyer, it almost runs very similar to the Kaiser Soze scene at the end of The Usual Suspects, where Kevin Spacey is walking away and Chaz Palminteri is figuring out that he is Kaiser Soze. That it kind of is a little bit like that, because Lucian leaves a pint of blood on the bed for him to drink, and then also leaves his cane, and leaving the cane is that's the big reveal, but it juxtaposes with him walking through multiple layers of security in order to get there. I liked it. Okay, whatever. Then Morbius drinks the blood, escapes. And then meets up with Martine, and they end up going down to this underground laboratory after they track these counterfeiters, right? These counterfeiters. And he goes down there and he's like, you guys can take the money, get the hell out of here. I just want the sciencey stuff, and it's you're gonna what? I mean, I know they already established that he's kind of like a MacGyver and he can literally do whatever he wants. They established this in the very beginning of the movie, but it still comes across as being really weird. Never mind, there's one F-bomb in this scene, and it's just so nonchalant that I caught it. I'm oh, there's someone ADR'd that later on. Okay, cool. But then they start figuring out a way to kind of stop Lucian, because they need to figure out how to reverse what this particular anticoagulant that he took will do. And it was funny though, is he's I'm gonna kill myself in the process, right? But then him and Martine are I love you, but I love you, and they make out, and I'm you got the girl, right? You got the girl. You've got you can walk, you can fly, you could probably screw with some serious intensity, and yet you're I'm just gonna kill myself because artificial blood ain't gonna be enough. Man, work on a goddamn work. You a scientist. Work on the cure. Whatever. But then Lucian is now trying to force Michael Morbius to accept who he is by he's killing people and kind of pinning it on him, even though the authorities are yeah, not really buying it and whatever. And then we get into the third act of the movie, and this is where things really just fall apart. I was enjoying it up until this point. I was really enjoying it up until this point. But then after this, it just ends up kind of falling apart, and that part sucks because Jared Harris figures out that Lucian is all well and good. By the way, again, getting a little bit ahead of myself here, we do get the scene everyone talks about with Matt Smith dancing, right? And a lot of people talk about that. Now, I liked that scene, and let me explain why. I feel that it has a lot to do with why I enjoyed the same kind of scene in Spider-Man 3. What we have here is a visual need to showcase a character, the opposite side of the character, the juxtaposition, the antithesis to that character. And so when you need to do it in a visual way, it usually involves something that is so wildly against what we know that character to do. And that's why having a kind of shy or meek character be very full of bravado and dancing and doing all of this stuff that they normally wouldn't do is meant to convey it. Now, I'm not saying that it is the best way to do it, but that is why I feel that they did. Also, that scene was pretty funny. It's very meme worthy. And you know what? Morbin time, okay? Morbin time indeed. So after that, right, again, Jared Harris, Lucian, they talk, there's that whole father-son, you love the other brother better, and he kills him and he, or leaves him for dead. So Morbius can show up and then, watch his father figure die. And then, of course, Lucian also has Martine, and he ends up, using her as bait, and he ends up biting her in the neck and wounding her and leaving her for dead. And then Morbius finds her, and then Morbius is all I can save you. And she's no, make it count. Right. She's basically just eat me, but not in the way that I think we as the audience would want to see it happen. Just saying. But in the way that the movie wants to show us, right? Not the fun way, but that, you know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so, but right before, he kisses her, but she bites his lip and one drop of blood falls in her mouth. And I'm oh yeah, she's totally we know what's going to happen. She's totally going to turn into the vampire. What's funny about that, though, is that Lucian had already bit her neck, probably sucking about half of her blood. Let's just assume about half of her blood. And then Morbius finishes the job. He literally finishes the job. and sucks down the other half of her blood. And then later on, she awakens after being converted. She dies and then gets reborn. But it's like, okay, would maybe a little bit more going on with that particular scene there. But anyway, after that, the two of them fight. They fall into an underground subway tunnel, which, by the way, was only added in on the reshoots because it was meant to be Central Park. Like I said, there was a lot cut for time, I think, from the last act of this movie, which is always bad when they do that, but I get it. They focused more on the story versus the finality of it, I guess. And then, the two battled it out. Morbius calls in literally every vampire or every bat in New York, uses them to distract Lucien long enough to stab him with this anti-serum, and Lucien dies. And then, he's like kind of begging his friend to not let him die. And that was a good scene because they had good chemistry with one another, and they were brothers. They were Spartans, them against the world, and Lucien was not like, he was evil. He was definitely like, exposing like the worst part of himself to this. But what really was fascinating about it was the fact that it's like he just wanted Morbius there with him. They were brothers. They wanted to do this together. He even killed a guy earlier on for talking crap about Morbius. So it's like his character was interesting is what I'm trying to say. And then from there, the movie basically just ends. And then we get to the final post-credit scene. And the post-credit scene is, Michael Keaton coming into that world because of the spell at the end of No Way Home. They let him out of jail. They don't know who he is or why he's there. And then he contacts Morbius, meets him out in the desert with the vulture suit. And then it's like, hey, I'm putting together a team, it's something to do with Spider-Man. And it's like Morbius doesn't question anything at all, period. In fact, all he says in that scene are, I'm listening and fascinating, and that's it. That's it. And it's just Michael Keaton doing a voiceover. It's like not even Michael Keaton there. It's just Sony being Sony is really what it boils down to here. I blame Avi Arad, as I will always do in these scenarios, because he's the primary producer on this movie. So he had a lot of sway over the story and the final cut and all that stuff. And obviously this movie has found a home with some people, but it has a lot of problems on that third act. But I'll be fully fair on this one. Will I watch Morbius again? Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. I'll 100% watch it again because it was entertaining enough to watch if there's nothing else to watch and I just want something to put on in the background and check out the scenes that I like. It's entertaining enough on that front. It's not bad. It ain't great, but it ain't bad. So that's where I am at that one. Anyway, what are your thoughts on Morbius? Let me know down in the comment section. If you guys like these reviews, these like reactions and reviews and breakdowns, let me know down in the comment section. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great one and peace out.